Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is my very first YouTube Live, so thanks for being here. I'm really excited. I'm honestly a little nervous um, just to try something new with everybody tonight. If you can hear me, please put something in the chat. I just want to make sure I've got all the technical stuff worked out and you can hear. Great. So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Adam. And on April 11th, 2024, I set out on what I call my Grand Detour. It was a 112-day, 18,225-mile solo motorcycle trip across the US and a little bit of Canada. I rode through 28 states, 3 provinces. I visited more than 30 national, state, and provincial parks. And I rode just about every kind of road you can possibly imagine, from twisty, scenic Butler G1 roads to endless plains, deserts, coasts, mountain passes, and a few interstate highways. When people take a look at a map of my trip, which I'm going to try and share with you now, I get all kinds of questions. And this broadcast is about all of your questions. So ask me anything, whether it's about the best roads, the hardest days, the gear and the tech I use, or what it's like to be on the road for 4 months straight. Drop your questions in the live chat and I'll answer as many as I can. And if you're watching on replay, welcome to you too. Leave your questions and comments, or leave your questions in the comments, and I will do my best to answer them offline. Before we dive in, do me a favor. If you like this kind of meaningful motorcycle travel, stories, and practical tips and scenic detours, hit the subscribe button. It tells me you're riding along, and it helps me and more riders discover the channel. So before I get started on questions, I wanted to share a little bit about one little anecdote that I was thinking about as I was making my latest video about my trip, and that is Glacier National Park. It's one of the most stunning, beautiful, exciting places I've ever been. And as soon as I decided to take this trip, I knew I wanted to go to Glacier. And I wanted to ride the Going to the Sun Road. It's a 50-mile road that goes right along the cliff and right along the edge of the park, and it's just stunning. And when I got there, it was raining. And I spent a little bit of time in the visitor center talking with a gentleman who was actually on a bicycle. And I asked him where he was from. And he said, "Oh, I started my trip in San Francisco." And I said, "Where are you going?" He says, "Portsmouth, New Hampshire." And so this 80-year-old guy had just come off the pass and was biking across the country. And it really inspired me. It really made me feel like these are the kinds of adventures and these are the kinds of people and these are the kinds of things that I really enjoy. And I was there doing it. So I finished riding Glacier and I rode in the rain, and it was still beautiful. But it wasn't the Glacier that I had really imagined. So I took a little detour and I spent a few days dipping down into Idaho, which is stunning if you've never been. Lolo Pass, Stanley, Idaho, the Sawtooth Mountains. And all the time I was thinking about Glacier. And I kept checking the weather and looking at the weather reports. And finally I saw that the roads at Glacier and the forecast for Glacier was going to be stunningly beautiful for the next few days. So I hightailed it back up to Glacier. And I rode it again, both directions. And it was one of the most incredible experiences of the trip. I finally got to see it the way I had imagined. And I took away from that sort of the persistence and the idea that everything's a detour. You never know exactly what's going to happen, where you're going to end up, what you're going to see, what things might get in your way. But if you keep going, things seem to work out. And I had an absolutely wonderful time riding through Glacier and then Yellowstone and all the other places that I went to. And I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and talking a little bit more about the trip. So let's check the chat and see what we have. Great. So I'm going to start with some questions that people had sent me beforehand, um, and go through some of those. And feel free to type anything in the chat, and I'll get to it as soon as I can. Um, One of the most common questions that I get is, what was the longest day you rode? And surprisingly, the longest day I rode was actually the second day. It was 508 miles, and it was from Hagerstown, Maryland to Greenville, South Carolina. The reason it was the longest day is because I had started my trip on, as I mentioned, on April 11th, which was a Thursday, and I had signed up for a 2-day motorcycle class at the BMW Performance Center down in Greer, South Carolina. And so I kind of had a deadline. I had to make it there in 2 days. And so the first day, it was Thursday, it was a little rainy, and I finally got as far as Hagerstown, Maryland that first night. But I had to make it all the way the next day. And so through the rain and then the sun, I did 508 miles. It took me about 6.5 hours, 7.5 hours. Um, and it was the longest day, but it was certainly not the prettiest, not the most exciting. And spending 7 hours on the highway doesn't make for a great road trip story. Doesn't make for a great road trip. Another question I often get is, I call this trip my Grand Detour. And why do I call it my Grand Detour? And there's really three reasons. First, I had always wanted to do a long trip. I think everyone who has a motorcycle wants to do a cross country trip. But I didn't have any specific plans. I hadn't set a date. I hadn't made a specific plan to go. And in February last year, I got laid off in a corporate reorg. And I realized this was my chance. This was my opportunity. If I didn't go for it, I would probably not get an opportunity like this again. So part of it was an unexpected detour in life. Second, I didn't set out on this trip with a rigid goal, with a rigid plan. I had a few key dates and a general direction. I was taking a motorcycle class in South Carolina, so that was a fixed date. I had a friend who was playing at a jazz club in Nashville. Hi, Jody, if you're out there. And that was a fixed date. I had to make reservations to stay in Yellowstone, which was a fixed date. And I had the BMW rally in Redmond, Oregon. So I had those 4 dates. And other than that, I knew I just wanted to go around the country, and I wanted to go clockwise, starting south first, so it would be warmer, and then heading up north. And I wanted to go into a little bit of Canada as well. And third, the trip was grand in just about every way, in terms of miles and days and parks and views and meals and people I met. And it was just a grand trip in every sense of the word. So hence the Grand Detour. So someone asked here, which area surprised me most? You expected it to be someplace that I expected to be something different, or exceeded my expectations, or didn't live up to my expectations? That's a great question. So I think the place that surprised me most was, it wasn't my first national park, but it was sort of the first. Um, it was sort of the first sort of spontaneous trip to a national park, and it was Mesa Verde National Park in southwestern Colorado. And I really didn't have any expectations. It wasn't a place I had planned on visiting that day. In fact, I had planned on riding the $1 Million Highway that day, which is a road that goes from Silverton, Colorado to Ouray. But unfortunately, it was open, but it was snowing, and I wasn't going to ride a road like that in the snow. So instead, I went to down to Mesa Verde, and I just found it to be amazing. The the Native Americans that built those cliff dwellings and carved those homes right into the side of the rock, and the views and just the peacefulness of that area. It was sort of the first time in the trip where I really was just like completely relaxed. I had gone to Colorado, I had ridden through some wind, and I had ridden through some good weather and some bad weather, and I had finally gotten close to where I wanted to be, and it was just really an amazing experience, a relaxing experience. And I found an author that had written extensively about that area, and I cannot remember his name right now, but I have a couple of his books on my reading list that I want to dive into when I get a chance. Where's my next great big trip? Great big trip. Um, well, the next trip I want to go on, or the next big trip that I have sort of in the works, is I want to go to Newfoundland and Labrador, and up in the Northeast, I want to go through Prince Edward Island and see the puffins and the icebergs and the parks up in that area. It's supposed to be absolutely stunning, and I'm looking forward to that. But I do not have a plan or a date set for that yet. I want to know what state had the biggest characters. Thinking of restaurants and other places. Um, I think California had sort of the most diversity. I actually came into California through Death Valley National Park and rode down to Joshua Tree and then over the San Bernardino Mountains into LA, and then went up the Pacific Coast Highway up into Santa Barbara, and just each section of the Pacific Coast Highway and each section of California, because the state is so long, um, was just really, really different. And so that's kind of a neat experience going through that much of the country, going north to south, because you go through a lot of different climates and a lot of changes in climate, a lot of changes in weather, and a lot of different kinds of food and people that you meet. Um, so I think that was sort of the biggest, uh, sort of the biggest place there. Let's see. How did I pack for a trip like that on a bike? It's hard enough to packing for a week of air travel. Well, the challenge of packing on a motorcycle for a trip like this is that you do not have a lot of space. I have a big bike, and I have two side bags and a bag in the back called a top case, and there are each about the size of a small carry-on, small airline carry-on. And so the way I packed was I had to bring tools just in case something happened on the road. And to dive into one of the other questions, no, I didn't have any roadside issues. But I packed a bunch of tools and they're kind of heavy, so I put them on the bottom. And then I had one side bag that I used for riding gear, riding clothes. So a lot of um, a lot of lightweight sun protection, um, athletic wear that would whisk away sweat and help keep me dry and cool. And then the other bag was sort of casual clothes and things that I would wear off the bike. And then in the top case were things that I needed while I was riding, so sunscreen and snacks, bandanas and things like that. as well as my computer and video equipment and things like that. So I found that I had really enough stuff. I would also stop every probably 3 to 5, uh, eh, maybe 4 to 7 days. I would spend 2 nights in a hotel. So once a week, I would want to make sure that I spent 2 nights in a hotel, and I would usually find laundry facilities and do laundry in the hotel. So was able to take as much as I needed, and I felt like I had everything. So how did my bike do? Was the servicing did I have any service issues, and would I have chosen a different bike? Gosh, no. I love my bike. It's the absolute perfect bike for this kind of travel. Um, Another question I get a lot is what kind of bike do I have? And it's a 2023 um, BMW K1600 bagger, or also called the K1600 Grand America, and it's a big touring bike. It's about 900 pounds. Um, you know, and it's got plenty of power. It's got amazing brakes. It's designed for really um, long travel, and it's incredibly comfortable. I did have one problem, and that is I did develop a little bit of an oil leak that I was keeping an eye on, and ultimately I did have to get the water pump for the bike replaced in Salt Lake City, and that took a couple of days. But that turned out to be an amazing serendipitous detour as well, because my brother-in-law Scott, who might be out there, hey Scott, um, came and joined me in Yellowstone, and we drove down to Salt Lake City. And when my bike was going to be stuck at the dealer for 3 days getting serviced, we ended up taking the car back down to Moab. And we went to Arches National Park and Canyonlands, um, and just had a great time. So I did end up having to get some service, but not a big deal. How does one budget for a trip like this? Did you go over or under? Um, that's an interesting question. I can't say I went over or under. I didn't budget for this trip. I knew that this was a once in a lifetime trip, and I didn't want to I didn't want to worry about every, every dollar spent and every in every decision I made. So I didn't do that. I did stay. One of the decisions I made early on was that um, I was going to stay in hotels each night, and so I did stay in hotels. I ended up joining the IHG rewards program and went from absolutely no status to like platinum elite status in just a couple months. Um, and so now I've got some good miles and some good discounts. Um, but I did, it staying in a hotel every night, and eating almost every meal uh, out somewhere. Yeah, it was expensive, but absolutely worth every minute and every dollar, just to have that experience. How did I keep hydrated on hot days? Uh, so one of the things, so I haven't done a whole lot of modifications to my bike, or at least I don't think I've done a whole lot of modifications to my bike. But one of the things I did do is I put a water bottle cage on the fairing, mounted a water bottle cage on the right side on the fairing, and so I always had a water bottle with me, and would fill that up with Gatorade and fill that up with water. And every time I'd stop somewhere, I'd make sure I drank some water. Um, I have since learned that it's much smarter to take small sips of water all the time, like every 10-15 minutes, rather than to stop at a gas station, down a Gatorade, and then keep going. And so since then, I've gotten I bought a bag that fits on the back of the bike. That's like a Camelback, and it's got a straw that comes over my shoulder, and I can drink water while I'm driving. Did I have a favorite state or park? Um, it's like asking someone if they have a favorite kid, asking if they have a favorite park. They're so different. I found it really, really hard. I find it really, really hard to compare Death Valley and Joshua Tree to Yellowstone and Redwoods and Glacier and Jasper and Banff. I find it really, really hard to compare those. Um, but the ones that I mentioned are really ones that stand out. I mentioned Mesa Verde, and I think Yellowstone is without a doubt a place that everyone should visit. It's stunning. Um, the bison are amazing. They're huge. There are thousands and thousands of them. Uh, we got stuck in probably a 500 bison traffic jam for about a half an hour, and just as they were walking down the road, walking right next to the car, uh, it was just amazing. And we were there in the season where the little babies were hanging out, and so they call them red dogs. And we have a couple. I have a couple pictures of the red dogs in the field. And so I think Yellowstone was just absolutely stunning. And I stayed at uh, um, the Old Faithful Inn, so every 90 minutes you could sort of just look out the window of the inn and see Old Faithful erupting, and that is just incredible.
Question from Marty.
Do I have AAA or some such insurance to cover my travels? Yes, I do. I'm a member of the BMW Motorcycle Owners Association of America, and they have a roadside assistance plan that, knock on wood, I did not need, and um, tire replacement programs and towing plans and things like that, um, that I did not need at all. And so that was, but I do have it. It also reminds me of a piece of tech gear that I carry with me all the time, and that's a Garmin InReach Mini, which is uh, a small satellite device that works. Uh, that's a GPS, and it works as an SOS system. So if I am in serious trouble, all I have to do is press the SOS button, and help will be on the way. They'll I can communicate using it even if there's no cell service, and they'll send police or ambulance or whatever you need, um, if you if you do that. There are also companies that offer motorcycle insurance for, generally for international travel, if you need to be airlifted or if you need to be transported someplace for a medical emergency, that cover that.
There was another question. Is there anything that you encountered that was really surprising?
Is there anything that I encountered that was really surprising? Um, yeah, I think there were a couple of things that were a couple of things that I mean, there were some things I was expecting. I had done a little bit of research on some of the roads, um, that I was going to be traveling on, and so I knew kind of generally where I was going, but I didn't know the specific roads. And I got really comfortable asking people, "What's your favorite drive? What's the prettiest drive you've been on? What's the most scenic or beautiful place that I should go or I should visit while I'm here?" And the answers that I got from people led me to some really, really interesting places. um, and they range from one place that stands out to me is called Skyline Drive, and it's in Canyon City, Colorado, about an hour west of Pueblo on Route 50. And it was a really small, narrow road that just went up the ridge on a mountain, and it was speed limit of 10 miles an hour. It was one way, and the road was maybe a little bit wider than a car. And on both sides of the road, there were 800-foot drop offs, and it was terrifying. It was not expecting it. I had no idea, but someone was like, "Oh, Skyline Drive, that looks nice. You know, you should do that." And I had no idea what I was getting into. And so I have a video of that on my channel, and it was scary, but it was absolutely stunning and it was beautiful. And so I think that was sort of one of the big surprises, and it got me really, I think, a little bit more comfortable just asking people where to go and what to do, and then and sort of taking their advice. Some other places that I think fall into that category. I was waiting for a friend in Denver, and my bartender was asking me where I was planning on going, and I mentioned I wanted to go up to Port Angeles, and so he said, "Hey, my sister-in-law runs the whale watch up in Port Angeles, Washington, or in Port Townsend, Washington. You should go there." And so I did, and I signed up for a whale watch, and I wasn't expecting to, but that was an amazing surprise. And when I checked in, I said, "Does anyone know Doug in Denver?" He's like, "Oh, that's my uncle." And so I ran in, got to meet some of that family, but I also got to see orcas and sea lions and seabirds, and just spend half a day out on the water, and that was stunning. Um, and then another place I think that was really interesting was as I was trying to figure out how I was going to get into Canada, I could kind of go up the interstate just north of Seattle. Um, and someone made the very wise suggestion. I do not remember who, but someone made the very wise suggestion that I just go east on Route 20, go through the North Cascades National Park, and then go up. I think it's 97 or 94 up to Osoyoos, Canada, because there's a much smaller border crossing there. And if I hadn't taken that suggestion, I wouldn't have seen the North Cascades National Park and Diablo Lake and Ruby Ridge or Ruby Mountain, and that was just an absolutely stunning area as well.
How many
How
hours?
many hours a day did I typically ride? Um, the way I would plan out my days, so I would generally ride um, anywhere between 6 to 8 hours in a day, usually about 3 or 4 hours in the morning, then break for lunch, and then 3 or 4 hours in the afternoon. And um, And so I would generally do between 6 and 8 hours. And I would also plan kind of 2 days ahead. So if it was Monday, I was thinking about where I was going to stay, what hotel I was going to stay at on Wednesday. And so that gave me enough flexibility that if something changed, I wouldn't be, scrambling to try and change all my reservations, but I did have enough scheduled out that I knew I had a place to stay the next night. Did I have any specific safety equipment? Yes. So when I told Donette that I wanted to take this trip, um, she gave me basically we talked about four rules that I had to follow on the trip. Rule number one was I had to have all the safety equipment that I could think of, and I'll get into that. The second was I had to call her every day. The third was that I had to have a live GPS so that she could track me and make sure that my little dot on the map was moving and wasn't in a hospital or someplace terrible. And the fourth was that every once in a while, not all the time, but every once in a while, I had to eat a salad. So I thought those are good rules. I can I can deal with those, and I can travel with that. But to get into the safety equipment, there are a couple of things that really stand out. First is my bike's got all kinds of safety features. It's got traction control and anti-lock brakes and things like that. Um, but some of the really, and I'm in all the gear all the time kind of rider. So I'm always riding with full pants that have armor in them on the knees and on the elbows and on the shoulders. Wear a full face helmet, but a couple pieces, and I mentioned the Garmin InReach that I have. So I kind of put those in the category of safety equipment. But a couple of other things I got. One was called a brake free, which is a light that attaches to the back of my helmet, and it uses accelerometers to sense when you're slowing down or speeding up, and so it'll automatically flash a light on the back of your helmet when you slow down. And if you ride a motorcycle, you know that a lot of times when you slow down, it's really just because you took your hand off the gas and you took your hand off the throttle or you downshifted and you didn't actually hit the brake. So most of the time you're slowing down, your brake lights aren't actually going on. So the light on the helmet helps people behind you see that you're slowing down when they ordinarily wouldn't. And the other piece of equipment uh, that I used all the time is a Helite eTurtle 2, which is a vest that's an airbag, and that also has detectors in it and sensors in it that detect if you are in an accident or in a fall, or if your acceleration changes dramatically in some way, and it automatically deploys an airbag. Um, and that fortunately has never gone off, and I don't know if that works, but I assume it does.
Question for Lisa.
So, what has been the most unusual motorcycles I've seen during one of your rides? So, the most unusual motorcycle I saw during one of my rides was an absolutely gorgeous, pure white Indian Chief motorcycle. And I ran into this woman on a at a scenic overlook just off of Scenic Byway 12 between Torrey, Utah and Bryce Canyon. And it was absolutely gorgeous. And she was towing um, a little trailer that looked homemade, that was made out of um, an old wine barrel. And so she had this gorgeous bike, and she was towing a wine barrel behind her. And I thought that was really unusual. And she actually told was telling me about some of her travels, which included her a trip that she had done where she had shipped her bicycle over to Europe and ridden through Russia and Siberia. And I was just floored at listening to some of her stories. And but that was sort of the most unusual bike that I saw. I also get a lot of questions about food. So I would most of the time, so when I would finish with my day, the last thing I wanted to do was, after I was done unpacking, cleaning up, getting settled into my hotel room, the last thing I wanted to do was get back on the motorcycle and go ride somewhere to dinner. So most of the time I would um in, in fact all of the time except for one night, um I would I would, change, and I would walk to someplace close for dinner. And often that would mean an Olive Garden or an Applebee's or something, um, you know, sort of fairly common. But there were a couple of meals that really stood out to me. One was in as I was going through Las Vegas. It's the only time I took an Uber to a restaurant. I went to one of Bobby's Flay's restaurants at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, and that was really really good. Um, and another time was at in Stanley, Idaho, and this was actually the I think this was the best meal of my trip, which was a, s- um, a seafood risotto in Stanley, Idaho, at the Sawtooth Hotel, which was just at the base of the Sawtooth Mountains. If you've never been to Stanley, Idaho, it's gorgeous. Um, I don't think any of the streets in Stanley, Idaho, are paved. It's the town is really tiny. It's like 3 or 4 streets. Um, and I had one of the best meals I've ever had. And people, if you're staying at the hotel, they'll you can automatically eat at the restaurant. Otherwise, there's a wait list for people to get into the restaurant. It's really, really good. Did I get sick at all on my trip, and how did I manage that? Yes, I did. Um, so I mentioned Glacier at the start. I had ridden through Glacier, and I when I rode through Glacier in the rain, I then did a loop down through Idaho, and somewhere on my way back from somewhere between Boise, Idaho, and Missoula, Montana, I got COVID, and so I ended up spending 3 nights at a hotel in Missoula, Montana, with COVID, and then felt better enough to ride over to Helena, Montana, and spend another 2 nights in Helena, Montana before I felt good enough to continue on the trip. Um, but it sucks. It really, really was a drag to be sick in a hotel room. Um, just feeling achy and not really being able to move. And the hotel didn't have a restaurant or didn't have room service or anything like that. So I kind of was forced to order takeout and then, mask up, walk over to a restaurant, run in real quick and grab my meal and leave. And then the woman who was working the front desk took a little pity on me and gave me a huge handful of tea bags that I really, really appreciated. Um, but yeah, I spent a lot of time just sitting in the bed and just waiting for it to all go away, and it finally did. Um, and but it's not a pleasant experience. Did I pick up any special souvenirs? Yeah, I did. So when you're on a bike, I like to say that all of your souvenirs have to be small and flat. So stickers were my souvenir of choice. I would buy stickers from every national park and place that I went, and those were sort of easy to carry and easy to to pack and take with me. And then I would stick a lot of the stickers on my computer as well. And then I got one souvenir that was really, really sweet. I was in Oregon and I was riding just north of Florence, Oregon, on my way to Astoria and riding the coast of Oregon. And that is an amazing experience if you ever get a chance to ride along the coast of Oregon or drive along the coast of Oregon. It's just absolutely beautiful. But I stopped and I did a little tide pooling, and I had never done any tide pooling before. And I ran into this family, 2 little kids and mom and dad, and they were off, with their rubber boots wandering through the tide pools, picking up all kinds of little cute, adorable things. And the kids, watching the kids was such a blast because they were so careful with like a tiny little crab or a tiny little thing that they had found. Um, and the mom said to me, "Oh, were you looking for Oregon amber?" And I said, "I don't know what Oregon amber is. I've never heard of it." And so she found a little piece of Oregon amber and she handed it to me and she said, "Well, welcome to Oregon. Here's your piece of Oregon amber." And so I do have a small piece of Oregon amber that I picked up on my trip, and I stuck it in my pocket and still have it. Hmm, cool. So one question that I wanted to address or wanted to answer a little bit about was, I spent 112 days and 18,225 miles on the road. And so a lot of people ask, well, so what'd you learn? What did you learn about yourself? Or what did you learn about this kind of traveling? Um, and I think the thing that I learned was really that I love this kind of traveling. I really do. It's the opportunity to have a lot of unknowns, to be able to explore, to be able to change direction or change plans and have that freedom. I love that kind of traveling. Traveling by motorcycle is a really wonderful, unique experience. And if you're familiar with Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Robert Pirsig talks about the difference between riding in a car and riding on a motorcycle. And when you ride in a car, you've got this screen, your windshield, you've got this frame that you're looking at everything through a frame. And when you're in a motorcycle, you're in it. You go down a hill and you feel it get a little cooler. You pass a roadside barbecue stand and you smell the barbecue, miles ahead. You you pass farmland and you're really in the world and in that experience. And that's something that I truly loved about motorcycling and traveling this way. So that's it. I want to say thank you very much, to everyone who joined. I really appreciate you taking the time to join my first YouTube live and ask questions. And I'm looking forward to sharing more of my trips, more of my travels, more of my journeys. My next video is coming out in a couple of days, and that's going to be talking about Glacier and my experience there. And then after that, I'll be doing my trip to Idaho and then Yellowstone and sort of the last legs of my trip, and then onto some other adventures. But again, if you have the chance, please please subscribe. Like I said, I really appreciate it. It lets me know that folks are out there. It helps other people discover the channel, and honestly, it helps me keep me a little motivated to know that people are enjoying the stuff that I'm putting out. So thanks again. Thanks very much. Have a great evening.